Welcome to Real Brave and Unstoppable. Here, you'll hear stories and inspiration about showing up in the world authentically and having the courage to create the life you want. I'm your host, Courtney Rivard. I'm a mom, recovering engineer, lover of the outdoors, and professional life coach. I help smart women just like you live happier lives full of purpose and joy by empowering them to love who they are, get unstuck, and take action toward creating the life they dream of. In other words, I help them be real, brave, and unstoppable. It is possible, and you can do it too. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Hello, friends, and welcome back to Real, Brave, and Unstoppable. Thank you for joining me for episode number 82. Today, I'm going to be talking about coping with being lonely. Do y'all have days where you just feel like it takes forever to get certain things done? Like super unproductive. Like it's not that even that it's unproductive. It's just that everything takes like 10 times as long as you thought it would. Yeah, I'm having one of those days. I should have been recording this podcast like 5 hours ago. Oh, well. Oh, well. Okay, so let's dive into this episode. We're going to talk about coping with feeling lonely or the fear of being lonely. This comes up for a lot of you that are going through a few different things like divorces or breakups, or my empty nest moms out there. That's hard. That's a big transition. And then also, I have talked to people that feel this way too, that are in relationship with someone where they don't have a lot of support or connection, so they feel really lonely. So this comes up for a lot of you, I know, and I've had experience with this myself. So I thought it would be a great thing to dig into today. I have a story about a client of mine that I have been working with, and a little while ago in a session, she talked to me about how her partner had started traveling quite a bit for work. And she found herself missing him a lot when he was gone. And then when he would like have to leave again, she found herself feeling super down about him being gone. And she was really bothered by it. She even found herself getting kind of angry about it. And when we dug into it a little bit, she realized that she would actually get kind of this little panicky feeling when she thought about him being away. So then we talked about it a little more, about her feeling afraid to be alone or kind of dreading that. And she didn't feel like that really resonated. She wouldn't have said to herself, I'm afraid to be alone. I know people have asked me that too, like after divorce, like dating again and stuff. Are you afraid to be alone? And that comes up so much. And I think that we're going to dig into that because it's so much more complicated, I think, than actually being afraid to be alone versus, fine being alone. But she didn't feel like she was afraid to spend time by herself, but her emotions were like saying the other thing. So it was like there was this incongruency. On one hand, her thoughts were that she didn't mind being alone. She had lots to do, friends to, call and all that stuff. But yet when she thought about it, she'd get that panicky feeling I mentioned that didn't really match what she was thinking. So there was something underneath the surface that was, getting her. It was like she was in this tug of war with herself or her true self, who was looking at the positive side of it, and her ego that was trying to tell her that being alone was like the worst possible outcome. It was trying to protect her while her higher self was trying to reassure her that she could totally handle it and would be just fine. So the discrepancy was a little confusing for her, of course, right? So why were those intense emotions like winning, even though she logically knew that this was fine? It wasn't going to hurt her. She wasn't going to die to be by herself for a weekend. So today I want to dive into that a little bit because I know so many of you are going through or have been through rebuilding your life after the end of a relationship, other kind of loss or big transition. And a lot of you have struggled with being lonely or being alone and the fear of that sometimes. And a lot of you have resistance to the idea of being alone too, even if it's not something that you think you're afraid of, but it is something that a lot of people do struggle with. So let's dive into this. First of all, let's normalize this. It's normal to fear being alone or fear loneliness. As humans, we're wired for connection. In fact, if we go back to Psychology 101 and look at good old Maslow's hierarchy of needs, love and belonging is like the third tier from the bottom in the pyramid. And it's preceded by like physiological needs like food, water, breath, things like that, and security and safety. Those are the only things that are higher up on the, or depending on how you look at it on the, the hierarchy is like a pyramid. So it's at the bottom, meaning it's the most important. It's third from the bottom, if that makes sense. So, in order to avoid loneliness, depression, and anxiety, those emotions that we really don't like to have, humans need to feel loved and accepted by others. So, it really makes sense that we'd have so much resistance to feeling lonely, right? Connection is a pretty important thing to our survival. Even if you're an introvert, you still need connection or love and belonging in your life. So, biologically, it's really very normal to not want to be alone. So, totally normal. Can understand why we go through that, right? But when you go through a loss, like the end of a relationship, your life situation has changed really quickly. You go from having this connection with someone to then not having it in a pretty rapid time frame. So maybe you've shared a house, you have someone that comes home every night, or you've had someone to lean on for support when you've needed it. You've had someone to fulfill your intimacy needs, and then really suddenly that's just gone. So when that goes away, there's a void. And since nature abhors a vacuum, that hole wants to be filled. So you're going to want to fill it with other ways of getting connection. But that can feel really overwhelming because you haven't had to worry about filling it for a long time. It's kind of like you're starting from scratch. When you end a relationship, you don't just wean yourself off of it. It's like done. And that's really hard. When you've had the connection consistently and then it's gone, even if the connection wasn't the best in the world, when it goes away, it feels bad and you're missing that connection. So, hence the loneliness. So, it's totally normal. But when you're in this place, you're having to kind of get your bearings again. You're trying to find a new normal, and that's not easy. So, like I said, it's super, super normal to feel afraid of being alone because you don't want to feel that. It doesn't feel good. This feeling does not feel good. And it's an out of your comfort zone thing. Whenever you get out of your comfort zone, your ego tells you that, oh my God, you're going to die. This is terrible. You need to find another relationship pronto. So, we biologically fight being alone, really. And your ego is trying to protect you. It's telling you you don't want to be alone. That's the worst thing ever. It's not safe to be alone. And you haven't learned yet that you don't have to believe everything you think. So it's totally normal to feel that way. And the other thing to remember here as I talk about this is that I feel like I might have kind of contradicted myself, but so when one connection goes away, there are other ways of getting connection, right? So maybe your relationship ended or, you have a partner who's away a lot. I'm talking about how we need connection, but then on the other hand, I just said that you don't have to believe everything you think. But what I'm really meaning there is that being alone, after the end of a relationship or with a partner that's gone a lot, it doesn't mean that's not your only connection in life. So it means that you'll be okay when you're by yourself. You'll just find new connection. The other thing that scares people about being alone is that I feel like our society is kind of makes it like a flaw if we're not with someone. And this is a generalization, but I'm thinking back to when I was in college in my 20s, and there was just never a question that I would meet somebody and get married and do all the box checking, like, get a job and buy a house, have kids, all the things, all the boxes checked. There was just never a question. That's just how people did things, right? So that's what I mean when I say we're programmed. Generally, this is how things go. At least when I was in my 20s. I don't know about you, kiddos, if anyone is young and listening to this going, and that's not how it is now. But I think there's kind of an underlying shame factor almost Or, like a fear of judgment. What are people going to think about me? I don't have a partner. What's wrong with me? A lot of us, I think we make it mean something about ourselves and about our worth. Or, if you've been through a lot of relationships and things don't seem to work out, you might be thinking, what's wrong with me that I can't make anything work? And then there might be the fear that since you haven't been able to stay in a relationship, you'll be alone for the rest of your life. You're never going to find the one that you'll be with forever. So, there are all these reasons why it's totally normal to feel afraid of or resist being alone. But I want you to notice something about what I've been talking about so far. I've been talking about worrying and thinking that you should be checking the boxes, that you're afraid of what people think of you. I've been talking about the thoughts that are coming up about being alone, right? There's the thoughts. So the fear, the resistance, it all starts with those thoughts about what it means to be alone to you. And this is huge. It's really good news also because you totally have the power to choose your thoughts. What? Yes, you do. But you have to pay attention to them. What thoughts are you having that are making you feel afraid to be alone? Or that you're afraid you'll never find anyone else? Or what are you thinking that's causing you to be afraid of being judged for being alone? The thing with thoughts, though, so you can think about this, like what thoughts are causing these things. But the thing with thoughts is that we have a lot of them. So it can be hard to pinpoint the thoughts that are causing you to start that fear response. I was actually talking to a colleague of mine the other day about this, about thoughts and filtering out thoughts and becoming aware of them. And it turns out we were talking about how humans have anywhere from 50,000 to 70,000 thoughts a day. Folks, there's a lot of thinking. And it's impossible to filter every single one of those thoughts to know which ones are creating the resistance to being alone. You can't analyze every single thought that passes through your brain to determine if you want to keep that thought or not. There's not enough time. So, what do? Well, there are a couple of things. The first thing is to pay attention to your feelings that signal something is off, like, which it cues you to pay attention to what your thoughts are in that moment. And the feeling can be a cue to say, hey, oh, the thoughts or the story I'm telling myself about this here is not helpful. So I'm going to, get a little curious about it and see if I can rewrite this a little bit. The off feeling you get from a negative emotion is a cue to get curious and dig a little deeper. Like with my client, she had that panicky, kind of panicked feeling, or just really, and she said it, manifested in like her solar plexus area. And it was just kind of that nervous, like kind of buzzy feeling she was describing it as. And that's a cue. Oh, like what is it? What is going on in my brain that's causing that? Because your thoughts create your feelings. It's a cause and effect thing. Now, a lot of people have a hard time like really knowing what they're feeling. And if you're someone who does, because a lot of people are kind of disconnected from their feelings as like a defense mechanism. So if this is you, it's good to practice getting into your body when something feels off. So ask yourself, like, where does that off feeling show up? Like I said, my clients was showing up in her solar plexus area. What sensations are you feeling? Try to describe it as best as you can. Does the feeling that resides in your body have a shape or a color or a texture? Is it still or is it moving? This is a really good way to get you out of your head and to physically feel what's happening in your body as a result of the thoughts that are causing the fear. So it's such a good practice. Abraham Hicks talks about using your feelings as an emotional guidance system when you're working on manifesting something. But I think it's such a great thing to be in tune with all the time. In order to manifest something, you need to always be moving toward that and thinking thoughts that bring you closer to that. So you need to talk and act as if you already have the thing. So if you don't feel good, that's your clue that you're off track from moving in a direction that brings you closer to what you want to attract. For example, if you want to attract more connection into your life, like this example, you wouldn't want to say, I don't want to be lonely anymore. You'd want to say something like, I love all the connected relationships I have in my life, or I'm attracting rich authentic relationships into my life, or rich, authentic relationships are coming to me. I'm getting closer every day, things like that. The universe doesn't distinguish between a negative and a positive when it comes to attracting things. Like attracts like. So negative will attract negative. So you want to watch that. Where your focus goes, that grows. So if you're focusing on something negative, you're just going to bring more negative to you. You always want to be speaking about what you want in terms of moving forward, not pushing something away from you. So back to the feelings, when your feelings don't feel good, it's a clue to you to just get curious about your thoughts and the story you're telling yourself. And I'll do an episode on storytelling, a future episode that will help with this too. But it's a great time to dig into those thoughts because, like I said, the thinking is what causes the feeling. So then you can kind of reverse engineer that. If you're feeling something that doesn't feel good, what's the story you're telling yourself about your circumstance? So, getting back to my client, she found herself thinking about being alone all the weekends and noticed that panicky feeling in her stomach, solar plexus area. And we dug into this a little bit. And in the end, she had a story about being alone that was causing her to move into fear whenever her partner was going to be out of town. And I think what it really boiled down to is that she was just telling herself that it was going to be terrible to be alone. And because she went through a time in her life where it did feel terrible to be alone, and she sort of put up some defenses to protect herself from that. So I think it was as simple as that. She just had a story in her head that said this, it's really awful to have to be by yourself this much. And sometimes it's that simple. Sometimes there's a little more to unpack, but it can be simple. But her brain was just saying, or her unconscious mind, or her ego was telling her how terrible being by herself was going to be. But that's the thing with thoughts. Your ego wants you to believe anything that it thinks will protect you. And sadly, most people don't realize they have the ability to choose whether or not to believe their thoughts. And, they just aren't all true. They're only true if you make them true. And so that's where things get really exciting because you do get to decide what's true for you. You get to decide what your story is about it. So if your thought is, oh my God, it's so terrible to be alone. It's just terrible to be alone all these weekends. It's not necessarily terrible unless you make it terrible, right? If I look at it like this, it's not terrible to be alone. I can do all these things. I don't have to worry about taking care of whoever's, gone. I can go do the things that I want. It's a good opportunity for me to just, have fun by myself, do things I can't do when they're with me, on and on and on. But it's all in your perspective. So it's all in the story you're writing, all the story you're telling yourself. So we've talked a lot about thoughts so far and how you don't have to believe them. They're only true if you make them true. But your thoughts, where do they come from? Where does the story come from? Your thoughts, your stories, your patterns, all of that. It comes from growing up, your conditioning, your upbringing, your beliefs about yourself and how the world works. Expectations factor into that too, like all kinds of things that have been piled on you as you've gotten older. And so you've got a lot of layers of armor built up that, your ego will pull from to say, hey, one time this one thing happened and you were alone and it was terrible. So forevermore, you don't want to be alone. So your ego just will pull from those different stories that you've, hung on to throughout the years. And that's not always helpful. So think about it this way. This is why you can have one circumstance or one situation, like being alone, for example, and one person might think it seems like the most miserable thing ever. And the other person might be completely giddy over having a weekend to herself, right? She might love that, be grateful for the alone time. So one circumstance can yield just a ton of different thoughts, just depending on who you are. And it's all about the stories you tell yourself about being alone, what that means about you or, your relationship to someone else. The great thing about that means that it's not an either or thing. It's not a causality thing. Your circumstance does not cause the thought. Your brain creates the thoughts about the circumstance. The circumstance is just there. It's neutral. And it doesn't mean anything until you make it mean something. But guess what? like I said, you have the power to change your story or your thoughts. So my client, she has the power to really look at the feelings about being alone and unpack that. Is it really true that it will be awful? That's her thought. It will be awful. So is her thought really true? Is she really afraid of being alone on all these weekends? She's not really, no. In fact, when we started really looking into it or digging into it, she started thinking about all the things she had to get done and how it was just going to be so much easier to get them done. And how she had a couple friends that she could get together with that she hadn't seen in a while. So it actually, the more she started thinking about it, she started to see that the story that she had about it being awful, she realized wasn't really necessarily true because it actually could be kind of a fun weekend. And this is also, I will say that this is based on the work of Byron Katie. There are 4 questions that she teaches with sort of challenging your thoughts. The first one is it true? And sometimes people will be like, well, yeah, it's true. Because you're not really, you're just, it's kind of your default response, right? But if you dig into it, is it really true? That's the second question. Basically, when you say, is it really true? Can it be proven in a court of law? Is it completely neutrally true? Fact. Is it a fact? Most of the time, our thoughts are not facts. And then there are 2 more questions. One is there a reason to keep the story or the thought? A stress-free reason, which most of the time, there's not going to be a reason that's worth, keeping the thought. Most of the time, those unhelpful thoughts they're not there to be helpful. And then the fourth one, which is my favorite question, is who would I get to be if I didn't have that story or that thought? What would be possible for me? And the great thing is you can do this with anything, with any feeling, any thought, any feeling thought combination. So if something is feeling off to you, if you're not feeling the way you want to feel, you just take a look at that. What thoughts are behind it? So today we're really just talking about being alone, but yeah, you can do it with anything. So it's really great that you actually get to decide what your story is about your circumstance. You get to decide if being alone is scary or not, or if it scares you or not. And then the more you play around with this, you're going to see how all these things are connected. The more you notice your feelings and start to unpack those thoughts that cause them, you'll start to see how certain circumstances cause this cascade effect of, oh, I have a story about that, so I start feeling this way, and then it keeps going. Your feelings cause an action or an inaction, and then that determines your outcome. It's all connected. It's kind of fun to start to see those patterns. Yeah. But it's all in how you think about it. And how you think about it likely isn't your truth. But the other thing I was going to say is that rewriting your story is about really coming home to yourself. And I talk about that a lot because everything really boils down to what is true for you, returning to home to yourself. How does my conscious self really want to think about this? How can I choose me when I rewrite this story? How do I want to feel? That's a great place to start. How do I want to feel about this? If you're not sure how you want to think about it, how do I want to feel about being alone? How do I want to feel about being by myself? So maybe my client wants to feel like she looks forward to her alone time. She loves her time with her partner, but she also looks forward to her alone time. She enjoys it. Maybe she also wants to feel empowered. If she's needing connection, that she can get that when she needs it. And that also spreads to, what if she didn't have a partner? She's always empowered to find that connection in her life. It's really amazing when you learn. You don't have to believe your stories. They're not true unless you make them true. It's a game changer, total game changer. But it starts with awareness. It starts with noticing the feeling. So if you don't take anything else away from today's episode, if you take one thing away, I want you to remember that you don't have to believe everything you think. If you think it, it doesn't mean it's automatically true. You get to decide what is true for you by coming home to yourself and just getting reconnected with that truth. The second thing I want you to take away from this is that paying attention to how you feel it opens up a lot for you. So that's the one thing I want you to work on. Start paying attention to how you feel. And that leads me into the last piece of this is how do you actually work with the thoughts? Like how do you work with these stories and actually change them to cause a different feeling? I mentioned awareness. That's the first thing is to practice noticing them. I always say that awareness is half the battle. And it really is. When you can start to notice those feelings or the thoughts like in the moment in real time, you can, at first, you start to notice them and maybe you go reflect and see how you would handle them differently. And then as you get more practiced in it, you'll start to be able to maybe think about what's true for you real time, even if you don't actually do it. You haven't quite connected it that quickly yet. And after a while, you'll be able to course correct in the moment in real time, which is pretty amazing. So that first step in working with your thoughts is the awareness. Check in with yourself, check in with your body. If you notice the thought before the feeling, that's fine. If you notice the feeling before the thought, you know, check in with your body. One thing to know about feelings and emotions, and I think I have this right. Sometimes I screw these up, but they're actually a little different. Feelings are actually the physical sensation that you have in your body. And that's caused by a chemical reaction in your body. And it's actually caused by your thought. But the feeling actually, it takes something along the lines of 90 seconds to come and go for that, chemical cocktail to like make its way through your body and then just dissipate. That's kind of like how long it takes. So anything beyond that, your mind is just creating from your story. That's where emotions come into play. The emotions have like a mental component to the physical feeling. So it's a loop. It's sort of a chicken and egg thing. Like you have a thought, it causes a feeling, but then you have thoughts about the feeling, and then it's around and around and around. So you start with a thought which you're unaware of, you feel a certain way, and then you judge the feeling. So you have a thought about the feeling, and then it can kind of spin. So I used to be a really big spinner. Sometimes I still am. So what you want to do is you want to notice the feelings. And if you're not in touch with your feelings, here's a great thing to do. So pull out a journal, a pen, and just sit for a little bit and get quiet. Have some uninterrupted time. Close your eyes and take some breaths and just ground into your space wherever you are. Focus on your breath for 5 to 10 breaths or so. And then think about what's in your mind. Just kind of sense it. What's going on up there? And this can take some practice, but just do a brain dump of everything in your head, just everything there. You can also write about your day. Like at the end of the day, if you just kind of write, this happened and just sort of, stream of consciousness, right? What happened, what events happened, what you thought about them, how you felt, anything that comes to mind. And then you can go back and look at what you wrote. So you're looking for the judgments. Anything that's a fact, you want to cross off. Like I went to the store. That's a fact, right? I wore a yellow sweater. That's a fact. So and so said this. That must mean they don't like me. That's a thought, right? So you're going to want to separate those. You're going to want to pull the thoughts out, highlight those. And then you want to really think about how you felt when you thought the thought. Or if you wrote down a feeling, you want to try to back that out. What was I thinking that caused that feeling? So if you're not used to feeling your feelings, maybe that means you check in a few times a day. Maybe you schedule times throughout the day where you maybe your morning routine, maybe lunchtime, maybe at your bedtime routine, and you just kind of check in with your thoughts and your how you feel in your body. Purposely and intentionally check in. And when you do that, you'll start to get in the habit of being connected with that. And that's practicing your awareness. You'll eventually get to where you can be pretty aware of your feelings all the time. And when you notice a feeling that doesn't, feel good, it feels off, that process is going to be so much easier. So I do also want to say that it's not bad to feel bad. It's a good signal to get curious about what's going on in your brain. Okay, so we're going to bring this back around and tie it up with a bow, bringing it back to how do I cope with being alone? So you got some great tips today on really looking at that when that fear of being alone or the fear of loneliness or resistance to the feeling of loneliness. A lot of times too, when you don't want to be lonely, people will, I've been in this place where I try to just insert myself into as many like social activities as possible. And sometimes like food or alcohol comes into the mix of like just numbing out those feelings. Anytime you find yourself doing that too, that's a really good opportunity to just get curious about what's under there. What are you thinking? What story do you have about loneliness and why are you resisting it so much? And chances are when you start really looking at that, the answer it doesn't make sense. I know my client realized, I mentioned earlier, she realized, oh, you know what? I don't really mind being by myself so much. It's just I have the story that it's a bad thing to be lonely or it's a bad thing to be by myself. So I'm making it mean something it doesn't need to mean. And by shifting her perspective, she was able to really enjoy her time. And then when her partner came back, she still missed him when he came back. It was it was a great reunion, and she appreciated that return, and they really appreciated each other's company even that much more. So, great opportunities, these things in life, but feelings, great signals to look a little deeper. Opportunities for growth, opportunities to learn more about yourself. So, I hope that was helpful, friends. It is hard. I just want to acknowledge that if you've been through the end of a relationship, or say, for example, your kids are, you're an empty nester, loneliness doesn't feel good. It is hard. And, know that that's normal. It's normal to feel that way about being lonely. And as humans, we do crave connection. So, when you feel lonely, you just seek out connection too. You know, if you have a hard time with that, there's groups, if you have friends in your area, meet up for coffee or even a phone call or a text. You can always look for that connection. You can always cultivate that. Maybe you have friends that you haven't been in contact with for a while. You can reach out to them and like renew that relationship. There are tons of ways to bring connection into your life. You don't have to feel lonely. There's no reason to fear it. It's okay to feel it. And there's always something you can do about it. So that's all I have today. Before I go, I do want to talk to you though about a new program I have. I'm so excited about it. It's called Rise. It's a 3-month private coaching program. And in that program, it's really geared towards exactly what I'm talking about today. Women who've been through a divorce or a breakup or are facing some other really big life transition where you feel a little lost. I've been there. You feel a little lost, disoriented. What's my next step? Don't even know where to go. How am I going to figure out where to go? So if you find yourself in that place at all, my program is perfect for you because I'm going to take you through the steps of accepting your situation, really getting to reconnect with yourself, learn how to choose yourself, stay in integrity with the person that you are, learn how to love yourself unconditionally. And those things are the building blocks that will help you reorient yourself and create a roadmap for where you want to go to create a bigger and better life than you had before the setback in your life. If you'd like to learn more about that, I am accepting applications for that. So if you'd like to chat, please go to CourtneyRivard.com/let's-talk, and we can hop on a call and see if it's a good fit for you. Okay, friends, thank you for tuning in to this episode of Real Brave and Unstoppable. I appreciate your support, and I will see you next week. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Real, Brave, and Unstoppable. If you'd like to learn more about creating an authentic life that's true to who you are, visit CourtneyRivard.com/lovelife to download your free guide on how to build your vision and create a life that you love. You'll be so glad you did. I'll see you next time.